I was still staring at the termination email when my phone lit up with a message from Ethan. I think we should take a step back. No call, no explanation, just that hours after I lost my job. Why now? Why so clean, like he'd already decided weeks ago? And why did his laptop, still open on my kitchen table, have a draft email with my financial model attached? I need someone more stable, he'd said earlier that day. But that file, that was mine. Every assumption, every projection. 3 weeks later, his new boss looked straight at me in a conference room and said, "So you're Addison Campbell. If you're watching this from somewhere outside the US, tell me where you're from and what time it is for you right now. And if you've ever had someone walk away right when you needed them most, you'll understand why I didn't walk away from this. 2 weeks before I lost my job, everything still looked stable from the outside. I was working as a financial analyst at a small advisory firm in Chicago, Halpern and Company. We specialized in early-stage startups, the kind that had ambition, but not yet the structure to survive their own growth. My job was to build that structure. I translated messy ideas into clean financial models, cash flow forecasts, cost scenarios, investor projections. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was precise, and I was good at it. Ethan used to say that was what he admired most about me. You see patterns other people miss. He told me once, watching me adjust a model late into the night, "You make things make sense." Back then, I believed him. He had been trying to break into venture finance himself, nothing concrete yet, just networking, small consulting gigs, and a lot of ambition. He'd come over after dinner, laptop in hand, asking if I could look over something real quick. At first it was harmless. A pitch deck here, a rough projection there. I'd give general advice, explain how investors think, what numbers mattered. But gradually, his questions got more specific. What assumptions would you use for burn rate if the product hasn't launched yet? How do you tier risk for early adopters versus institutional clients? What would make this look more credible to a Series A investor? They weren't casual questions anymore. They were the kind of details you only understood if you'd built models from the ground up. One night he asked if I could show him an example. "Just something basic," he said. "I learn better when I can see the structure." I hesitated. Company policy was clear about sharing proprietary work. But I told myself it wasn't like I was giving him client data. I could build a stripped-down version, generic numbers, no names, just the framework. So I did. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reconstructing a model from memory, clean sheets, neutral assumptions, no identifiers. It took me a couple of hours, and when I finished, I emailed it to him with a short note. "Use this as a reference." "Don't circulate." He replied almost immediately, "This is perfect. Seriously, you have no idea how much this helps." At the time, I felt proud, needed even. Looking back, that was the first moment something shifted. A few days later, things at work started to feel off. Daniel Halpern, my boss, called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't look at me right away, just kept tapping his pen against a stack of printed reports. "We're going through some restructuring," he said finally. "Budget adjustments? It's not performance-related." That phrase, "not performance-related," usually meant the opposite. I asked what had changed. We'd just taken on 2 new clients the month before. My workload hadn't slowed down. "It's bigger than any one project," he said. "We're aligning with new strategic partners." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push. Not yet. By the end of the week, I had my answer. A short HR meeting. A severance packet. Access cut off within the hour. Just like that, I was out. I went home in a kind of quiet disbelief. Not panic, at least not immediately. More like my brain hadn't caught up yet. I kept replaying Daniel's words. Strategic partners, budget adjustments, not performance-related. That night, Ethan came over. I told him what happened, expecting something. Concern. Anger on my behalf. Questions. Instead, he went quiet. "I'm sure you'll land somewhere better," he said after a moment like he was reading from a script. I tried to brush it off. "Yeah. I mean, it's Chicago. There are options." He nodded, but he didn't meet my eyes. Over the next few days, that distance grew. He canceled plans, took longer to reply. When we did talk, it felt careful, like he was already stepping out of the relationship 1 foot at a time. I told myself I was imagining it, that losing my job had made me oversensitive. Then 3 days later, he sent that message. "I think we should take a step back. No conversation, no attempt to fix anything, just a clean break." At the time, it felt like 2 separate losses colliding, my job and my relationship both gone within the same week. I didn't connect them. Not yet. It wasn't until I started applying for new positions that something else surfaced. About 10 days after the layoff, I got an email from a firm I hadn't even reached out to directly, Brooks and Reed Capital. The subject line was simple: interview opportunity. I assumed they'd pulled my profile from a recruiter database. It wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was the role. It aligned almost perfectly with what I'd been doing before, but on a larger scale. Institutional clients, bigger capital flows, more visibility. I hesitated before responding. Something about the timing felt too precise, too convenient, but I needed the work. So I scheduled the interview. The confirmation email came through an hour later. Clean, professional, standard format. Nothing unusual until I noticed the project description attached at the bottom. Development of a multi-tier financial model for early-stage investment evaluation. I read that line twice, then a third time. The phrasing wasn't identical, but the structure, the way it was framed, felt familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was standard industry language. Still that night, I opened my old files, what little I still had access to, and reread the model I'd built for Ethan. Same logic. Same tiered risk breakdown. Same progression from early adopters to institutional scaling. It could still be coincidence. That's what I kept telling myself. But as I closed my laptop, one question wouldn't settle if it was a coincidence. Why did it feel like I'd already seen the future version of this project before I ever applied for the job? The morning of the interview, I almost canceled. Not because I wasn't prepared, I was. I'd spent the last few days rebuilding my confidence, reviewing past models, rehearsing answers in a way that felt natural instead of rehearsed. But there was still something about Brooks and Reed that didn't sit right. Still, I put on my navy blazer, tied my hair back, and showed up 10 minutes early. The building itself was exactly what you'd expect: glass, steel, understated power. The kind of place where everything looks effortless but nothing actually is. The lobby was quiet, polished, and just a little too cold. Addison Campbell, the receptionist, asked. I nodded. "Melissa from HR will be with you shortly." I sat down, hands folded over my portfolio, trying to slow my breathing. Across from me, a conference room door stood slightly open. Inside, a large screen displayed a slide deck, paused mid-presentation. I didn't mean to look, but I did. At first, it was just shapes, charts, columns, numbers I couldn't fully make out from where I sat. Then something clicked. The structure. 3 vertical tiers. Early-stage volatility mapped against projected stabilization. A risk-weighted adjustment that fed into long-term valuation. It wasn't just similar, it was aligned. Too aligned. I stood up before I realized I was doing it, took a few quiet steps closer, just enough to read the headings. Adoption risk segmentation. My chest tightened. That exact phrase, I had written it myself. Not because it was industry standard, but because it made sense to me. It was how I organized uncertainty. It wasn't something I'd ever seen in a textbook. I stepped back quickly as footsteps approached. Addison. I turned. A woman in her early 30s extended her hand. Confident posture, measured smile. I'm Melissa Grant, HR. Thanks for coming in. Her tone was warm but efficient. The kind of person who didn't waste time. Of course, I said, forcing a small smile. Thank you for having me. We walked down a hallway lined with glass offices, conversations happening behind closed doors, screens filled with numbers and projections. Everything moved with quiet precision. Melissa led me into a conference room and gestured for me to sit. We've reviewed your background, she began, opening a tablet. Your experience with early-stage financial modeling is exactly what we're looking for. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. We're building out a new investment framework, she continued. Something scalable, adaptable. The team's already made some progress, but we need additional analytical support. Is this a new initiative, I asked? She paused for half a second. Not long enough to notice if you weren't paying attention. Relatively new, she said. Relatively. I asked a few more questions about the scope, the timeline, the expectations. Her answers were clear but carefully general. Nothing that confirmed what I was starting to suspect. Still, one thing became obvious. Whatever they were building, it wasn't starting from zero. After the interview, she walked me back toward the lobby. We're moving quickly on this role, she said. You should hear from us soon. Thank you, I replied. I was halfway out the door when I saw him. Ethan. He was standing near the elevators talking to someone I didn't recognize. He looked different. Sharper. More put together than the last time I'd seen him. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then his eyes met mine. There was a flicker of something, surprise maybe, or calculation. Addison, he said, like he hadn't expected to say my name out loud. Hi, I replied, keeping my voice even. The other person excused themselves, sensing the tension without understanding it. You didn't mention you were coming here, Ethan said. You didn't mention you worked here, I said back. A small pause. I just started, he said. It's a good opportunity. Yeah, I said. It seems that way. We stood there for a second longer than necessary. Not quite confrontation, not quite closure. I hope the interview went well, he added. I'm sure I'll find out, I said. He nodded, then stepped back toward the elevator. Take care, Addison. You too. I left the building without looking back. That night I replayed the entire day in my head. The slide, the phrasing, the way Ethan had reacted, just a fraction too controlled. I opened my laptop again and pulled up the model I'd built for him. Scrolled through each section slowly. Adoption risk segmentation, tiered volatility mapping, progressive capital allocation triggers. It was all there, and now somehow it was here too. My phone buzzed. An email. From Brooks and Reed. We'd like to offer you a contract position. I read it twice, then a third time. They wanted me on the project. The same project that felt like a reflection of something I had created. I should have felt relieved. Grateful even. Instead, I felt something else. Like I was being pulled into the middle of a story that had already started without me. And I still didn't know what part Ethan had really played in it. I didn't have the luxury of overthinking the offer. By the next morning, I'd signed the contract. Not because I trusted the situation, but because I needed to be inside it. My first day at Brooks and Reed felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew their lines. Everyone except me. Monica Reed introduced herself just before the team meeting. She wasn't loud or overly formal, just precise. The kind of presence that didn't need to prove authority because it was already there. "Addison," she said, shaking my hand. "Glad you came on board." Her eyes lingered a second longer than expected. Not unfriendly, just assessing. "Thank you," I replied. "I'm looking forward to getting started." The conference room filled quickly. Laptops opened, coffee cups placed in careful arcs. The screen at the front lit up with the now familiar framework. And then Ethan walked in. He didn't react when he saw me this time. No pause, no visible tension. Just a slight nod like we were colleagues who had met once at a networking event. It was almost impressive. Monica began without ceremony. "Let's pick up where we left off," she said, clicking to the next slide. "We're refining the multi-tier model before presenting to the partners next week." "Multi-tier." I kept my eyes on the screen. Ethan took over a few minutes in. "We've structured the early-stage risk segmentation to account for volatility in user adoption," he said, gesturing toward the chart. "From there, we adjust capital exposure based on projected stabilization curves." His voice was steady, confident, and every word sounded like something I had written. Not copied exactly, he'd changed enough to make it look original. Reworded phrases, shifted labels, but the logic underneath, that was mine. I felt it in the rhythm of the model, the way one assumption fed into the next, the way uncertainty was organized instead of avoided. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I started taking notes. Not on what he said, but on what he changed. Where he simplified something I had made more precise. Where he skipped over a constraint that should have been addressed. Where the numbers still aligned too closely with my original projections. It wasn't just similarity anymore. It was traceable, Addison Monica said suddenly. "What's your initial read?" The room shifted slightly. A few people glanced at me. I kept my voice even. "I think the structure is strong," I said, "but some of the assumptions in the early stage tier might be too optimistic, especially around user retention." Ethan's jaw tightened just barely, based on what he asked. "On how volatility actually behaves when there's no historical data," I replied. "Right now, the model treats early adoption like it stabilizes faster than it usually does." I didn't look at him when I said it. I looked at the screen. Monica nodded slowly. "That's consistent with what I've been seeing," she said. "We'll revisit that section." Ethan leaned back in his chair, expression controlled. "We can adjust the parameters," he said. "That's not a structural issue." "No," I said quietly. "It's not structural." And that was the point. The meeting moved on. Other analysts spoke. Numbers were debated. Deadlines were clarified. On the surface, it was just another project discussion. But underneath, something had shifted. I wasn't just the new hire anymore. I was a variable Ethan hadn't accounted for. After the meeting, people filed out quickly, conversations already moving on to the next task. Addison Monica said, "Can you stay a minute?" Ethan paused at the door, then kept walking. I closed my laptop and waited. Monica didn't speak right away. She walked over to the screen, pulling up a different version of the model. Older by the look of it. "This is an earlier draft," she said. I stood up and moved closer. My breath caught. It was mine. Not just similar mine. The structure untouched. The phrasing intact. Even the small formatting choices I never thought anyone else would notice. "Where did you get this?" I asked before I could stop myself. Monica glanced at me. "That's what I'm trying to figure out," she said. She tapped the corner of the screen. "Timestamp puts this version earlier than the one Ethan submitted, but there's no clear authorship attached. I didn't say anything. Not yet." "I've seen a lot of models," she continued. "This one and the current version aren't just similar. They're built on the same thinking." She turned to face me fully. "And thinking like that doesn't usually come from two people independently." The room felt quieter than before. "I need you to review both versions," she said, "line by line. Not as part of the team as an independent analyst." I nodded slowly. "And Addison," she added. I looked up. If there's something I should know about how this started, now would be a good time to tell me. I held her gaze for a second. Then I shook my head. "Let me review everything first," I said. "I want to be sure." She studied me, then gave a small nod. "Fair enough." I left the room with my pulse steady, but my thoughts anything but. Because now it wasn't just a suspicion. There were two versions of the same model. One of them was mine, and for the first time someone else had noticed. Monica's office was quieter than the rest of the floor. Not isolated, just deliberately contained. The kind of space where conversations didn't drift outside unless they were meant to. She closed the door behind me and gestured toward the chair across from her desk. "Take your time," she said, sliding a tablet toward me. "Start here." The file she opened wasn't the one Ethan had presented earlier. This one was older, cleaner, less polished, but structurally intact. I didn't need more than a few seconds. "This is mine," I said before I could second-guess myself. Not emotionally, not defensively, just factually. Monica didn't react right away. She watched me instead. "Walk me through that," she said. I leaned forward slightly, zooming in on the screen. "See this section," I pointed. "The way the early stage risk is segmented, it's not based on market categories. It's based on behavioral uncertainty. That's not standard." I scrolled down. "And this progression here, how the capital allocation adjusts after stabilization, it's tied to adoption curves, not revenue milestones. That's a design choice, not something you'd copy from a template." Monica nodded once. "Keep going." I hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I built a version of this a few weeks ago. Not for this company. For someone else." Her expression didn't change, but something sharpened behind it. "Who?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Ethan." The silence that followed wasn't surprised. It was confirming. Monica leaned back slightly in her chair. "When?" she asked. "About 3 weeks ago," I said. "I emailed him a stripped-down version. No client data. Just the structure." "Do you still have that email?" "Yes. And the original file, I should. Or at least the version history." She nodded again, slower this time. That would help. There it was, the shift. Not accusation. Not yet. But alignment. "I want to be clear about something," Monica said. "At this point, I'm not making any conclusions. But there are inconsistencies in how this project was introduced internally. In what way, I asked. The model Ethan submitted came with no documented development history," she said, "which is unusual for something this detailed, especially at this stage." That tracked. "Then why move forward with it?" I asked. "Because on paper it works," she said simply. "And because sometimes by the time you realize something's off, the project's already too embedded to stop without evidence." Evidence. That word landed differently now. Monica tapped the screen again, pulling up another file. "This is the version Ethan presented," she said. "Look at the differences." I leaned in. At first glance, it looked more refined. cleaner formatting, slightly different labels. Some of the variables had been renamed, but underneath, it was the same skeleton. Only now I could see where it had been altered. He simplified this constraint, I said, pointing to a section. It should account for delayed adoption variability. Without it, the projections are artificially stable. Monica watched my hand as I moved through the file. And here I added, this assumption was shifted. The range is narrower than it should be. Why would someone do that? She asked. To make the model look more predictable, I said. Less risk. More appealing to investors. I sat back. But it's not accurate. Monica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied me again. You're not just recognizing this, she said. You understand how it was changed. I let out a small breath. I built it, I said. Of course I do. Another pause. Then she reached for her keyboard and typed something quickly. Here's what I need from you, she said. I want you to review both versions in detail. Document every structural similarity, every assumption that overlaps, every place where the logic aligns. Like an audit, I asked. Exactly, she said, but informal. For now. I nodded. And Addison? She added, her tone quieter now. I looked up. If what you're saying is accurate, then this isn't just about credit, she said. It's about how this project was built and whether it can hold up under scrutiny. I understand, I said. And one more thing, she continued. The timestamp on this earlier version. She turned the tablet slightly so I could see the metadata. My stomach tightened. It was the exact date I had emailed the file to Ethan. Same day, same window of time. Does that line up with your records? She asked. Yes, I said. No hesitation this time. Good, she said. She leaned back again, folding her hands lightly on the desk. Then we proceed carefully. Carefully. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Just deliberately. I stood up, gathering my things. I'll have something for you soon, I said. I know you will, she replied. As I reached the door, she spoke again. Addison. I turned. You asked earlier why we moved forward with this project, she said. The truth is, I had concerns from the beginning. I just didn't have a reason to act on them yet. And now I asked. Now she didn't hesitate. Now I do. I left her office with a strange mix of clarity and weight settling in. Because for the first time, this wasn't just something I was carrying alone. Someone else saw it. Someone else was willing to look closer. But that also meant something else. If I was right, if all of this traced back to that one file I sent, then Ethan hadn't just used my work. He had built something on top of it. Something big enough to attract a firm like Brooks and Reed. And if that was true, then I wasn't just walking into a job. I was stepping into the middle of something that hadn't been fully uncovered yet. That night, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I dropped my bag by the door, walked straight to the kitchen, and opened my laptop like it was the only thing grounding me to something real. Monica's words were still sitting in the back of my mind. Document everything. Not prove. Not accuse. Just document. I logged into my email first. Typing Ethan's name into the search bar felt strange, like reopening something I hadn't fully processed yet. His messages came up instantly. Threads that had once felt casual now looked structured. I clicked on the one I remembered. The subject line was simple model example. There it was. My email. The attachment. The timestamp. I opened the file and cross-checked the metadata. Created date. Last modified. Everything matched. Then I opened the version history from my cloud drive. A timeline unfolded on the right side of the screen. Every change, every adjustment, every saved version. It wasn't dramatic, it was just consistent. A quiet record of hours I had spent building something piece by piece. I scrolled slowly. Initial framework. Adjustment to adoption variables. Refinement of risk tiers. Final cleanup before sending. No gaps, no jumps. Just a clear progression from nothing to something complete. My phone buzzed. Rachel. I hesitated, then answered. Hey, I said. You sound like you haven't slept, she replied immediately. I haven't, I admitted. I think I just confirmed something. About Ethan. Yes. I leaned back in my chair, eyes still on the screen. I found the email, the original file, the timestamps. Everything lines up. There was a pause on her end. Okay, she said carefully. That's good, right? It's something I said, but it's not enough by itself. What do you mean? It proves I created the file, I said. It doesn't prove how it got from me to where it is now, or what he did in between. Rachel was quiet for a second. So what do you need? I stared at the version history again. Something external, I said. Something that shows the file didn't just stay between us. Like what I didn't answer right away, because the thought had already started forming. Not from emotion, from pattern. When I worked at Halpern & Company, everything ran through internal servers, I said slowly. Even drafts. Even temporary files. Okay. If Ethan used anything beyond what I sent him, if he accessed a more detailed version or pulled data from my environment, there would be logs. Rachel exhaled softly. You think he went further than just that file? I don't know, I said, but I need to find out. And your old company would still have that. Maybe I said. If the logs weren't purged. And if they don't want to get involved, I thought about Daniel Halpern, the way he'd avoided specifics, the mention of strategic partners. They won't, I said, not willingly. So what's your plan? I closed the email and opened a new tab. I'm not going in accusing anyone, I said. I'm going in asking for information, framing it as a clarification. Rachel let out a quiet breath. That sounds like you. It has to be, I said. If I push too hard, they shut down. If I stay neutral, they might give me just enough. And if you're right, she asked. I looked back at the metadata, then at the timestamp, then at the subtle alignment between two companies that weren't supposed to overlap. Then this didn't start with Ethan, I said quietly. He just stepped into something that was already moving. There was a longer pause this time. That's worse, Rachel said. Yeah, I replied. We stayed on the phone a little longer talking through details. Not hypotheticals, just steps. What I could ask for, what I should avoid saying. When I hung up, the apartment felt quieter than before. Not empty, just focused. I opened my calendar and scheduled a visit to my old office for the next morning. No email, no warning. If I gave them time to prepare, they could control the narrative. If I showed up in person, I might catch something unfiltered. Before I closed my laptop, I went back to the version history one more time. There was a small detail I hadn't paid attention to before. A modification timestamp. Not from me. It was brief, just a few minutes after I had sent the file to Ethan. At the time, I must have assumed it was a sync delay or an automatic save. But now it stood out, because I hadn't reopened that file after sending it, which meant someone else had. I stared at the screen, the quiet certainty settling in. If that timestamp wasn't mine, then Ethan hadn't just received the file. He had interacted with it immediately, and possibly from somewhere I hadn't expected. I didn't call ahead. If there was anything left at Halpern and Company that could help me, I didn't want it filtered before I got there. The office looked the same from the outside glass doors' understated signage, the kind of place you wouldn't notice unless you knew what it did. Inside, though, it felt different. Not hostile, just closed. "Addison," the receptionist said, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming in." "I didn't either," I said lightly. "Is Daniel available?" She hesitated for half a second. "I can check." That was all I needed to know. He hadn't been expecting me. A few minutes later, I was walking into his office again. Same desk, same stack of papers, same careful way he avoided eye contact at first. Addison Daniel Halpern said, "This is unexpected." "I'll keep it brief," I replied. "I just need clarification on something." He gestured for me to sit, though his posture stayed tight. "What kind of clarification? Access logs," I said, specifically for files I worked on before I left. That got his attention. "We don't typically release that kind of information," he said immediately. "I'm not asking for a full export," I said. "Just confirmation of whether certain files were accessed externally." He leaned back slightly. "And why would that matter now?" I held his gaze. "Because I have reason to believe some of that work may have been used outside the company." That landed. Not loudly, but enough. Daniel exhaled through his nose, fingers tapping once against the desk. "You understand the position that puts us in," he said. "If there's any implication of a data breach, I'm not making that claim. I cut in, keeping my tone calm. I'm asking a question before I decide what to do next." Another pause. "This one longer." He looked at me more directly now, like he was reassessing something. "What files are we talking about?" he asked. I gave him the project name, the internal label we'd used, neutral enough not to raise alarm on its own. He nodded slowly. "I can have IT take a look," he said. "No guarantees. That's all I'm asking." He stood signaling the conversation was over, or at least paused. "I'll see what we can find," he added. I didn't thank him. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because this wasn't a favor. It was a fact-finding step. Outside his office, I didn't head for the exit. I walked straight to the IT area. Marcus Hill was exactly where I remembered him. 2 monitors, one half-finished coffee, and a focus that only broke when I stepped into his line of sight. "Well, if it isn't my favorite analyst," he said, pushing his chair back slightly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Hey, Marcus," I said. "I need a quick sanity check." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds unofficial already." "It is," I said. "And I'm not asking you to break policy." "Good," he said. "Because I like my job." I leaned slightly against the edge of his desk. "I just need to understand how your logs work," I said. "Hypothetically." He studied me for a second. Hypothetically, he repeated. "If a file stored on the internal server gets accessed," I continued, "you can see when it happened, right?" "Yeah," he said. "Timestamp user ID. Sometimes IP, if it's external. And if it's accessed from outside the network, then it's definitely logged," he said. "That's the whole point." I nodded. "And those logs, how long do you keep them?" "Depends," he said. "Critical systems, months. Sometimes longer." That was enough. "Okay," I said. "That helps." I turned to leave, but he stopped me. "Addison." I looked back. "This isn't hypothetical, is it?" he asked. I considered how much to say. No, I admitted. It's not. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. You already talked to Daniel? He asked. Yes. He nodded slowly. Then you'll probably get the official version, he said. Official version, I repeated. Filtered, he clarified. Careful. I didn't respond. Marcus glanced at one of his screens, then back at me. I can't give you anything directly, he said. But I can tell you this: if something weird happened, there'd be a trace, even if nobody wants to highlight it. That's all I need, I said. I left the office a few minutes later, stepping back out into the cold Chicago air. The conversation with Daniel had been controlled, predictable. Marcus's hadn't. Filtered, careful. Trace. I walked a few blocks before stopping at a corner, pulling my phone out to check for any updates. Nothing yet. No email. No call. But that didn't mean nothing was happening. If Daniel had already contacted IT, then someone was already looking at the logs, which meant two possibilities. Either there was nothing there, or there was something and they were deciding what to do about it. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello, Addison, a voice said. Calm. Familiar. Monica. I just got out of a call with legal, she continued. We need to talk. There was a brief pause. And you're going to want to hear this in person. Monica didn't wait for small talk. When I stepped into the conference room, James Porter from legal was already there, a folder open in front of him, his expression neutral in a way that felt practiced. Sit, Monica said, not unkindly. I did. James glanced at me briefly, then back at the documents. We've reviewed the materials you submitted, he began. Email records, version history, and the structural comparison between the two models. His tone was measured precise. Based on that review, there are significant overlaps that can't be explained by standard industry practices. I nodded once. I didn't need him to convince me. Monica leaned forward slightly. But that's not the part you need to hear, she said. James slid a printed page across the table toward me. Earlier today, we received supplemental log data from Halpern and Company, he said. I looked down. Server access logs, timestamps, user IDs. At first it was just numbers. Then I saw it. The date. The same day I had emailed Ethan the file. A second access. Not from my user ID, not from inside the company network. External IP. My pulse didn't spike. It just narrowed. Can you walk me through this? I asked. James nodded. The file you created was stored on your company's internal server, he said. Shortly after you emailed a version externally, the original file, not the stripped-down version, was accessed remotely. That shouldn't have been possible, I said quietly. Not under normal circumstances, he agreed. I looked at Monica. Unless someone had credentials, I said. Or temporary access, she replied. James tapped the page. The IP address used in that access request has been traced, he said. I didn't ask immediately, because I already knew where this was going. It belongs to Brooks and Reed Capital, he finished. The room didn't move. It didn't need to. This wasn't just Ethan using something you gave him, Monica said. This suggests that someone here accessed your company's internal system directly. Through Ethan, I asked. That's one possibility, James said. But we can't assume the path yet. Only the end point. I leaned back slightly, the pieces settling into place. Ethan asking more detailed questions. The timing of my layoff. Daniel's strategic partnership. The immediate access after I sent that file. This hadn't been random. It had been aligned. Does Halpern and Company know about this? I asked. They know there was external access, James said. They haven't formally escalated it yet. Why not? Because escalation creates exposure, Monica said. For both sides. I let that sit for a moment. So what happens now? I asked. James closed the folder halfway. Now we determine responsibility, he said. Internally first. Monica's gaze shifted slightly toward the door. Right on cue, it opened. Ethan stepped in. He stopped when he saw all three of us already seated. No surprise this time. Just a quiet understanding that whatever this was, he was already part of it. Sit down, Monica said. He did. James turned a page in the folder, then looked directly at him. We're reviewing the origin of the investment model currently under development, he said. We have evidence of external access to proprietary material from Halpern and Company traced to this firm's network. Ethan didn't speak. We also have documentation indicating that Ms. Campbell created an earlier version of that model prior to joining this company. James continued. Still nothing. Monica's voice came next. Ethan, she said, calm but direct. Can you explain how you developed your version of the model? He looked at her, then at me. For a second I saw it. Not panic. Calculation. It wasn't just me, he said finally. It was iterative. I refined it over time, based on what James asked. Ethan hesitated. Industry frameworks, he said. Discussions. Research. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. James slid the log printout across the table toward him. And this? He asked. Ethan's eyes moved over the page. Slower than mine had. More carefully. That's not from me, he said. Then how do you explain it? Monica asked. Ethan leaned back slightly, exhaling. I had access to Addison's example, he said. She sent it to me. That file was a stripped-down version, I said quietly. No internal data, no full model. His eyes flicked to mine. Maybe he said. But once you understand the structure, it's not hard to build from there. That doesn't explain the server access, James said. Silence again. This time longer. Ethan looked down at the table. When he spoke again, his voice was different, lower. I didn't think it would matter, he said. No one responded. I logged in once he added. Just to see how the full version worked. I didn't download anything. That's not what the logs indicate, James said. Ethan's jaw tightened. I was trying to make it better, he said. More complete. That's all. Monica didn't raise her voice. By accessing another company's internal system, she asked. He didn't answer. I watched him for a moment. Not with anger. With clarity. Because this right here was the part I hadn't fully seen before. He hadn't just taken what I gave him. He had crossed a line to get more, and then built something on top of it. I told you not to circulate that file, I said quietly. His eyes met mine. I know, he said. No apology. Just acknowledgement. James closed the folder. That's sufficient for now, he said. We'll proceed with internal findings. Monica nodded once. Ethan, she said, we'll follow up with next steps. He stood slowly, then walked out without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And for the first time since this started, there was no uncertainty left about what had happened. Only one question remained: what I was going to do with it. The formal report came 2 days later, not as a dramatic announcement, not even a meeting at first, just a calendar invite from Monica with a short note, final review. By the time I walked into her office, I already knew the outcome. James Porter was there again, along with someone from compliance I hadn't met before. The folder on the desk was thicker this time.
"Thank you for coming,
Addison," James said. "We'll keep this concise." I nodded and took a seat. "The internal investigation is complete," he continued. "Based on the evidence server logs, email records, and comparative analysis, we've determined that Ethan Brooks accessed proprietary material from Halpern and Company without authorization and incorporated that material into the model presented here." He said it the same way he had said everything else. Calm, precise, final. I felt something shift, not relief exactly, more like a tension I'd been holding finally had somewhere to go. And I asked. James glanced at Monica briefly before answering.
"He's been terminated effective immediately," he said. "Additionally, a formal notice has been issued to limit further exposure within the industry. Blacklisting without using the word."
I looked down at the folder, then back up. "Does Halpern and Company know I asked?"
"They've been informed of the findings," Monica said. "At this point, they're evaluating whether to pursue it further on their side, meaning legal action."
I let that sit for a moment. "And the model?" I asked. "We've halted its current version," Monica said. "We'll be rebuilding it from a clean foundation." Clean. The word carried weight now. James closed the folder. "That concludes the formal portion," he said. "If you have any questions about next steps, we can address them." I shook my head slightly. "I think I understand the situation." They both nodded, and after a few brief closing remarks, James and compliance stepped out, leaving just Monica and me. The room felt different without the legal framing. Quieter, more human. Monica leaned back in her chair. "You handled this well," she said. "I documented what I could prove," I replied. "That's exactly what was needed," she said. I studied her for a moment. "There's one thing I want to be clear on," I said. "Go ahead." "I'm not interested in dragging this into something bigger than it needs to be," I said. "I don't want to pursue him personally." Monica didn't interrupt. "But I also don't want my work to be treated like something anyone can take and reshape without consequence," I added. Her expression softened slightly. "That's a reasonable boundary," she said. "I'm serious about it." I continued. "If the company moves forward with anything derived from that structure, I want it acknowledged properly, or rebuilt entirely." "It will be rebuilt," she said. "From you." That caught me off guard just enough that I didn't respond immediately. "You're the only one who understands it at its core," she added. "And now we know where that core came from." I let out a slow breath. This wasn't the outcome I had imagined when everything started. There was no moment of triumph, no sense of winning. Just clarity. "And Ethan?" I asked. Monica's tone shifted back to neutral. "He's dealing with the consequences of his decisions," she said. "That's as far as it goes here." I nodded. Later that afternoon, I saw him one last time. Not in a meeting room, not in a confrontation, just in the hallway near the elevators. He was holding a small box. Personal items, probably. His badge already gone. He noticed me as I approached. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he gave a short, almost tired exhale. "So that's it," he said. "That's it," I replied. He looked at me differently this time. Not defensive, not calculating, just aware. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "No one does," I answered. He nodded once like that made sense. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," he added after a moment. I held his gaze. "I know I said, you were trying to get ahead. That seemed to land harder than anything else. He looked down briefly, then back up.
I thought if I could just make it work, no one would question where it started.
That's usually how it works, I said, until it doesn't. A small silence settled between us.
I'm sorry,
he said finally. This time it sounded different. Not strategic. Not timed. Just late.
I believe you,
I said. And I did, but belief didn't change anything. He shifted the box in his hands.
I hope things work out for you,
he said. They already are, I replied. He gave a faint nod, then turned toward the elevators. I watched him go for a second, then kept walking. Not because I was done processing it, but because I didn't need to stay there anymore. For weeks, everything had been tangled together. My job, my relationship, the model, the questions I couldn't answer. Now it was separate, clear. He made a choice, and now I could make mine. 3 months later, my calendar looked completely different. Not empty the way it had the week I lost my job, not crowded in that frantic, reactive way either, just intentional. Monica had kept her word. We rebuilt the model from the ground up, not by copying what existed, but by reconstructing the logic behind it. I documented every assumption, every constraint, every dependency, not just for clarity, but for ownership, so that if anyone ever asked where it came from, there would be no ambiguity. "This is yours," Monica said during one of our final reviews. "Make sure it stays that way." I did. The new version wasn't perfect. No model ever is. But it was honest. It accounted for uncertainty instead of smoothing it out. It showed risk where risk existed, even when it made the projections less attractive. And surprisingly, that made it stronger. By the time we presented it to the partners, there were questions, of course there were. But they weren't about where the model came from anymore. They were about how to use it. That was the shift. I wasn't defending something. I was leading it. Outside of work, things were quieter. Rachel still checked in on me, though less often now. Not because she cared less, because she didn't need to worry as much. "You sound different," she told me once. "More settled." "I think I am," I said. It wasn't that everything had resolved neatly. It was that I had stopped trying to make it. I thought about Ethan less than I expected. Not because what happened didn't matter, but because I understood it now. Not just what he did, but why. Pressure. Timing. Opportunity. None of those things justified the choice he made, but they explained it. And that made it easier to let go of the part of me that kept asking if I could have prevented it. I couldn't. The only thing I could control was what I did next. There was a moment a few weeks after everything ended when I considered taking it further, filing something personally, making sure the consequences followed him beyond the company. I even scheduled a consultation, then I canceled it. Not out of sympathy, out of clarity. The system had already responded. The record was there. The boundaries had been enforced. Pushing further wouldn't have protected me more. It would have kept me tied to it longer. And I didn't want that. One evening, I stayed late at the office finishing up a revision before a deadline. The floor was mostly empty, the city lights stretching out beyond the windows. I opened the original version of the model, the one I had built months ago in my kitchen. Then I opened the current one, side by side. The differences were obvious now, not just in structure, in intention. Back then I had built something to help someone else succeed. Now I had built something that reflected my own standards, my own decisions, my own boundaries. I closed the old file without saving it, not because it didn't matter, but because it didn't need to come forward with me. As I packed up to leave, my phone buzzed with a notification from the project tracker. A small update, nothing urgent. Still, I smiled. Because it was mine to respond to. Not something I had to fix after the fact. Something I had created from the beginning. And that felt different. Not like winning, like owning my place in the room. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just doing the work. And that was enough. What this story really comes down to is not betrayal, but clarity. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't that someone took advantage of you. It's realizing that your value was always there long before they tried to use it. When people cross your boundaries, it doesn't erase your worth. It reveals where those boundaries needed to be stronger. And that kind of awareness changes everything. You stop giving access without intention. You stop confusing loyalty with silence. You learn that protecting your work, your time, and your trust isn't selfish, it's necessary. If you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you, used your effort, or walked away when things got hard, I hope you remember this. Your strength isn't in holding on to them. It's in standing firm in who you are without needing them to recognize it. Healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like distance, clarity, and choosing yourself without guilt. If this story meant something to you, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set a boundary that changed everything for you? Share your experience in the comments, and if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.